and reward and legalize offshore illegal gambling sites that accept bets from Americans in violation of the U.S. law. The licensing regime contemplated by the legislation is premised upon the ability of Internet gambling sites to detect and block attempts to gamble online by minors, compulsive gamblers, and individuals located in jurisdictions that legally prohibit gambling. Let me say in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, experts in the field of online protection and identity verification have openly questioned the effectiveness of technology currently available that attempt to verify age and identity in online settings, and advised the Judiciary Committee that only the prohibition we passed would work. In summary, Mr. Chairman, there's no compelling reason to change the course that Congress wisely charted last year when it passed strong legislation to combat the scourge of Internet gambling. Rather than spending our time trying to undermine the new law, we should be devoting our energies to rigorous implementation. Americans, youth, their families, and communities should expect no less. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me say, this debate is not about whether it's legal.
I just don't want to. We're over 10 minutes. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief. I just want to make a couple of quick points. First, I very much want to associate myself with Chairman Frank's remarks and simply want to point out what I think are certain misunderstandings in terms of the current law. If you were to listen only to those last year who advocated in support of the Unlawful Internet Enforcement Gambling Act and listen to the ranking member this morning, you might have the impression that there is no legal gambling on the Internet today in the United States. That's not true. The law, the way it was crafted last year, in the current state of the law, if you want to bet on horse racing on the Internet today, you can do it with perfect legality. So if your thing is betting on horses, you can bet on the Internet, and we sanction it. If you want to participate in lotteries in many of the states across the nation, you can bet on lotteries all you want on the Internet. Off-track betting is now on the Internet. So the uneven state of the law simply says if you're a horse fan, a horse racing fan, you can bet on the Internet. But if you're a poker player, you can't bet on the Internet. If you play Mahjong, and I represent a district that is probably the Mahjong capital of the world, if you play Mahjong, you can't bet on the Internet. So this statement of gambling versus non-gambling is not, I don't think, reflective of the reality of the law the way we are today. And if I can make one point as to personal responsibility, which I think gets to the heart of some of the objections. I have 3 kids. You could turn on HBO at 1:30 in the morning and probably, very simply, watch movies I wouldn't want my 14-year-old child to watch. Does that mean we should shut down HBO? Of course not. What it means is I or my wife ought to be wondering why my 14-year-old is up at 1:30 in the morning, and if he is, checking to see what he's watching on television if we permit it. But it's not HBO's fault if he's watching something at 1:30 in the morning and I'm not bothering to check on my 14-year-old. Likewise, to bet on gambling on almost all sites, and I understand there's some exceptions, you need a credit card. Well, how does a kid get a credit card? He or she gets a credit card usually because mom or dad or the caregiver or the guardian permits them to have a credit card. And if they're really industrious and they're going about getting these phone cards from Eastern Europe or whatever it is, again, parental responsibility. So I find it somewhat ironic that those that often are so quick to argue parental responsibility, individual responsibility, when it comes to online gambling, all of a sudden parents have no responsibility at all, apparently, to monitor the conduct of their teenage children. The real issue is adults that want to gamble on games of skill in particular, like poker or mahjong, why not? Why should we make it into an illegal behavior? And with respect to adults gambling, they do it today legally with the Congress's blessing, with state legislatures' blessing all across America, but they happen to be the preferred choice of gambling, apparently horse racing and lotteries. But if you want to bet on poker and mahjong and other games, dog racing, apparently that's somehow immoral. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity to talk about this bill, being an original co-sponsor. I'm not sure I can improve on John Stuart Mill or your statement because I endorse essentially what you said. But I do want to make a few comments about this. It's been already mentioned, but I strongly believe there are two major reasons why this is a good bill. One, freedom of choice is important in a free society. Responsibility for improving one's behavior should be the individual, the family, and the church and local community, not the federal government. It hasn't worked before, and it probably won't ever work in the future. Also, I have a strong I believe strongly in supporting this type of legislation because I want to do my utmost to protect the Internet, and that this is a source of the spread of information that even for good reasons, regulating the Internet can backfire on us and be used for other reasons. Now, I was particularly interested in the Chairman's comments about the economic right to spend one's own money, and I strongly endorse that principle. But I would like to emphasize that I'd like to see the day when the individual has an economic right to spend all their money and not just the money left over after the government took their share. So I would make a distinction there that I would like to see that we as individuals have the right to spend all our money. But I would like to identify with the ranking member's statement as well, because he has made some very good points, and I agree with his concerns about the danger of gambling. Obviously, the issue of gambling doesn't interest me that much because I don't like it, and I taught my kids not to do it. But it's back to the problem of who's really responsible. One thing, if we look at our history, prohibitions never worked. It was a total failure for alcohol, and we're currently failing with drugs. So if you come in and have another prohibition, it won't work. It'll just drive it into the underground. And there's, even in the electronic age, there's ways of doing this. One thing that is interesting in this new age of prohibition is that in the original prohibition era, when we thought we had to prohibit the use of alcohol to improve one's behavior, we did it because of great concern for the Constitution. We amended the Constitution. Then we repealed it when we found out it didn't work. Today, there's no concern. We just write laws of prohibition, whether it's gambling or drugs or whatever. And I think the way we do these things are every bit as important as the issue itself. But I'm a strong supporter of this legislation, and over the years I had opposed the efforts of H.R. 4411, but I strongly support H.R. 2046 to restore the rights of Americans to decide for themselves whether or not to gamble online. And I yield back.
The gentleman from Ohio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll attempt to be brief. I want to welcome all our witnesses here today, in particular Reverend Hogan, whose church, I understand, is in Congresswoman Sutton's district, but you live in Hudson, Ohio, so I guess I get to claim you and welcome. And I think that as I listen to the other opening remarks, I have to tell you, maybe after this hearing, the gentleman from Florida can tell me how you bet on mahjong. I'm not familiar with that. But, and the other observation about parental responsibility. And
I think the interesting question is, from my experience, how do you teach mahjong players to use the Internet?